All right, welcome to episode 135 of Artcasters, the art show that alternates between Scott Cirkland and myself's channel, where we basically talk about being professional artists, some of the ins and outs of that, and talk shop and also work on art. And with us, we also have a rotating third guest chair. So let's all introduce ourselves. So I'll start. You're on my channel. I'm Joshua Kemble, and obviously you can check out my work on this YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed yet, click the subscribe link. And Scott, where can we find your work?
You can find my work at circworks.com, or I'm also on YouTube at Circworks on YouTube, also Instagram, Facebook, and but if you really, mostly on YouTube.
As well as on resorts, apparently.
Yeah,
Scott's coming to us remote from a resort on a business trip. Is that correct?
Yeah. So yeah, we're doing our big convention for my day job. So it's like everything we do all year kind of leads up to this. And so this was actually supposed to be hosted on my channel, but despite my best efforts, I could not get the internet to work. I brought my desktop. I went and got cables, and the cables didn't work. And I went and got a Wi-Fi adapter for my desktop because I don't have a laptop, but everything I tried, and I got the internet to work. The internet works fine, but it just would not let me connect to Google Hangouts. So I am doing this via my phone. And we were just laughing at the fact that here I've got this huge powerful desktop and I can't connect to the internet here, but my little phone works fine. So go figure.
Yeah, phones are like, it's insane. We definitely live in a weird dystopian future. So Corey is with us. He's our special guest, Corey Kerr. And Corey, where can people find your work?
You can find me at CoreyKerr.com and on YouTube, Corey Kerr Art. Pretty much just Google Corey Kerr on whatever and we'll be there. But you can kind of go to CoreyKerr.com and there's kind of like links to everything else.
Nice. Sounds good. All right. So we were thinking for just kicking off for a topic, it'd be fun to kind of talk, especially with Corey, about the idea of like accountability and incentives for artists. And what I mean by incentives is just kind of coming up with certain, basically like certain rewards for like a reward system to kind of keep yourself going with art, which I think all of us probably have our own little strange little systems we've developed, because a lot of art is really requires a lot of self-discipline, especially on long form projects, which we all work on. So that I think will be a pretty good kind of starting point. And then accountability, just kind of methods of finding ways to hold yourself accountable to create your art and to kind of, I guess, better yourself as an artist and stuff. So like I'll start it off with I guess probably accountability first. What kind of methods of accountability do you guys like kind of incorporate in your work? Like, what's the way that you hold yourself accountable to being productive and stuff? Because I know we all like kind of manage to knock out a lot of art. You know, like Scott, I know you're like very, very much in the thick of The Young and the Dead, which is a pretty epic undertaking. I mean, if you were to collect it all right now, like what page would you be on?
What page? Oh, you mean total? Like if issue 1 started page 1 and it kept continuing?
Yeah.
Let's see. Let me think here. Like 80 something? Oh, wow. 80 something, I think.
Yeah, so like getting 80 pages done of comics, like, you know, I know there's like maybe one rare person out there who's like, that's nothing, you know, but like I think most cartoonists, like, and most people who've like tackled this beast of comics, doing 80 pages is no small feat. So
yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, so like how do you, with that project, like how, and not just that project, but any project, particularly long-term projects, how do you kind of hold yourself accountable to creating art? Because at least for myself, like I'll catch myself making like excuses and kind of, I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum on this show, but you know, like in the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, he kind of gets into this thing called resistance that a lot of artists deal with, where it's like, you know, when you're sitting down to do your project, how everything in the world kind of creates resistance from like doing the thing you want to work on. So what do you do? What do you do to kind of overcome that? Like, and do you experience that, like that kind of the temptation to be like, today I'm going to play video games. I'm not going to, you know, I don't know.
Well, the key is to suck so bad at video games you don't want to play them. So, but yeah, that's a good question because like right now, I mean, it's been a little while since I've worked on Young and the Dead. So, you know, I was doing the art. I did my solo art show, and then I was getting ready for Phoenix Comic-Con, and now this convention. And so I'm really looking forward to getting back into it. But and I've as far as like getting work done, one of the things, and I probably talked about this ad nauseum, but I'll mention it again real quick just because it pertains to the question. But one of the things that I do is just try to break things up into manageable pieces, and that's pretty much the only reason why I have floppies instead of just going straight for the graphic novel. So I've got sort of a benchmark so that when I, you know, it's instead of whatever it would be, ends up being 120 something pages versus 22 pages. So, you know, that way I can kind of, you know, each time I hit that, it's like, oh, okay. Cause it's almost like, you know, when you're like, if you're jogging or something, you're like, oh, if I can just make it to that thing up there, up the road. And then you get there and you're like, oh, okay, I can make it to the next thing. And you just kind of, you know, set your sight on something, and then once you're there, like, okay, I can go a little further. So that's kind of, you know, what I do, how I approach the book. And, you know, also one thing that really helped was just the 100 Days of Making Comics. That really, you know, putting yourself out there. And I'm sure we'll get into this because I think the main thing that kind of sparked this whole conversation was what you and Corey are doing every other day, and what people like Gaz and Mike and Chris and Marsh are doing, you know, on a weekly basis with these kind of check-ins, as art checks. So I'm sure we can go into that a little more. But yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff, having like a kind of a buddy system like that works really well. But if you can't do that, then, you know, just being on the internet and saying, you know, putting it out there, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, just saying, you know, this is what I'm going to do by this point, by this time, and hopefully people will hold you to that, you know. But I think it helps if you get some people like, you know, that are willing to be a little hard on you if you don't, and kind of push you if you have trouble kind of yourself.
Yeah, that's really well said. So, yeah. I think like definitely that had a huge reason to why I wanted to address the topic, because I caught myself after finishing the 100 Days, and I'm glad you brought up the 100 Days, but after finishing it, I felt like this kind of weird absence of that accountability, like on video. But I also didn't really miss doing all the uploads and the editing and, you know, the crazy headache that went along with that.
Yeah. And I paused when I said that, because then I started to think, you know, when you do take that challenge, you are losing some time that you could be working on your comic just with all the editing and stuff. So there's kind of a little give and take there.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's a really valuable experience. And if, you know, I was a person who, I think even if you go back to like the early Artcasters when I was first on these things, I think I really espoused the idea of like, well, why do 100 days? You can, I'm doing 100 days every day. But after having done it, like officially, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons I think people should actually do it and join the Hundreds Facebook page and stuff. I mean, I think the accountability is the main.
Well, it's funny because you say that about your attitude in the beginning, and even like I know if you've been watching this show for a long time, you'll remember when Jeff Lafferty was on the show, and and he would always like think we were crazy for doing this 100 days of making comics, and somehow I don't know what clicked, but somehow he decided he was going to do it, and he's kicking butt on it. So yeah. So yeah, it's weird. Sometimes attitudes can change, and people can get converted to take the challenge. So
yeah, and I think just trying it, because it's surprising. Like to me, it was surprising. I've built a daily habit of working on these things, and it was surprising to me to find out that I still kind of cheated a couple days. Like having to like really sit down and do it for like 100 days straight really makes you analyze like, okay, maybe I haven't been doing like every day, so you come out of it with like this rush and all of that, but like I really missed the accountability. So it was nice to have just Corey and I just had this random conversation where we're like, I think it was one of those weird conversations that Corey and I sometimes have at like 2 a.m. And we were just like, dude, we gotta, like, do you think this is crazy or should we do this? And then we just ended up talking about it for like 2 hours and being like, dude, okay, we're kind of delirious. So tomorrow, let's
sleep on it.
I'm good. I just want to go back to what we were saying before, because right now, in my mind, I'm like, you guys are crazy. That was like down the road, I might be doing it too.
It's way more effective and way less time consuming than I thought it would be.
Oh, I knew it was going to be time consuming. I knew, even with it live and everything. And I'm noticing like your thumbnail, every single thumbnail has a different sort of look to it.
That's part of
graphic design is all different. I mean, like save yourself some time and just come up with one thing. And I don't know.
We have a rule though. We have a rule that we are that you can't. It's this little weird competition that we do because we alternate channels.
Right.
And we try. You can't spend longer than 5 minutes on the thumbnail. And so,
okay. Well,
so we have, we're just kind of slapping those together. I've got like a template with just assets all around the artboard, and it's just drag and drop, change a font, draw some things. So it's a little bit of the whole thing is an exercise in like how fast can we do the stuff that used to take us forever.
Okay, well that's cool. That's cool. See, and it doesn't come across that way. I mean, I know there was some setup in the beginning with the animation and everything, but once you have that in the can, then it's done. So, but yeah, I mean, it looks very polished and very well done. So, and even like I said, the thumbnails, I couldn't tell that. I mean, I'm thinking a lot of thought went into this to make it different and everything each time, and so.
Yeah, we fooled you.
Yeah. The struggle on it hasn't been the thumbnails. It's been that Corey and I really like. It's like when you and I talk, Scott. I mean, it's like anyone you like talking to. The big struggle is for us to try to keep it to 15 minutes, which we break the rule a lot. And I think that's the biggest. That's probably the biggest time crunch of it. So I think if people are interested in kind of joining in and doing it, just, I mean, understand you'll probably have a couple times where you go over, unless you're a really succinct, like non-super talkative person. But like Corey and I both, like we talk, we like talking, and we're both people who like really like explaining things with tons of words. And so it's like, we will have like, we'll have all the intentions in the world to do 15 and it goes way over. So that's the biggest time crunch of it.
As a viewer, I don't mind that you guys go long because I like longer videos to play while I'm drawing and stuff. So, but for you guys to do that every other day and do like sometimes getting close to that hour, sometimes I've noticed it's like, I don't know. It's good.
Recently, we've gotten close to the hour a few times.
Yeah.
That's just because my family's out of town, and
Okay.
so and so I'm kind of sitting alone in my studio, and I don't talk to anybody for 8 hours a day. And then I'm like, "Hey, somebody to talk to." So I think we were more succinct when I wasn't a bachelor. I think that was part of it. But yeah, I mean, some of the things. I mean, I guess we could. So we decided, because that was one thing that we were like, okay. Because for me, here's my problem. My biggest issue with staying on track is I do these stupid celebratory breaks where, like, if I finish a particularly difficult thing, I feel like I've earned the right to like relax for a minute, and that minute can stretch into 2 or 3 days. And so this is really cool because what we're able to do is I can't do that celebratory like break for a while, because I know that, I've got, a limited amount of time before I need to like report on progress again. And like all the guys that are doing the 1 week, that's like super awesome. I don't think that would work for me.
Yeah,
the reason it wouldn't is because I have a tendency to procrastinate until the last second. And so if the last second is every other day, then I pretty much just work every other day. But if the last second is like, I'm going to do it every Friday or every Saturday, I will work on it here, there, but then I'll pull an all-nighter on like a Thursday night so that I have something. And that's just because I'm stupid. But I mean, like, I think we all have these little quirks and these little things that you recognize about how you work and how you don't work, and what's going to work for you and what isn't going to work for you. And if you let those destroy you, then you're never going to get anything done. But if you recognize, like, oh, for me, I need more constant deadlines, or for me, I need to take breaks, every hour or so, or I'll burn out, or, whatever. And if you learn those, you can kind of use them to your advantage. And so it's actually interesting because, and I think this is true for Josh as well, for me at least, having it be 3 times a week, I think I'm getting in more time on my projects just because I'm working on it more consistently. Because I can get distracted and be like, I'm going to animate something, or I'm going to make 15 stickers, or whatever, and then all of a sudden I haven't moved the needle on my book in a week or two or something, What were you saying, Josh?
Well, no, I was just in wholehearted agreement. I mean, I've caught myself on multiple days where I'm like, man, I got to get to my project so that I have something to show on our art check, which is like, hey, it's working. If that's being a motivation to get it done, it's like that's something pushing me to sit down at the drawing table, overcome resistance, and get some progress. The other thing that even we brought up as an initial idea behind it too was just like, when you're working on these big projects, it's like it's really easy to kind of lose the forest for the trees and kind of get discouraged and stuff. So it's also kind of like an encouragement kind of thing too, for just like keeping on the ball. So it's not just about specific accountability, but also just like encouragement. So like the way we kind of even were talking about it that night when we were concepting it was just the idea of having it be kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous for artists, where it's like, you kind of support each other and then troubleshoot and kind of use it as a way to kind of keep yourself on point and moving towards a bigger goal. So, and that was like an extension of like this show, which is like, I've said this multiple times. There's literally, there's never any time usually when I work throughout the week where I get more done than I get during Artcasters, because we're like talking and I kind of lose track of time, and we're talking shop about art and stuff like that. And the next thing you know, I've like inked more than or drawn more than I thought was possible, And so it kind of functions in that way, except we're not drawing during the show. So it's like, which is another incentive to, you know, to for us to keep the time limit on it and stuff. But it's, I think whatever way, you know, I think if it's not that, I think it's got to be, you know, friends or art friends or I think, you know, maybe there are some personalities that just don't need that, but I think like for most people I know, I think it's really important to have that kind of thing. And you have it pretty often in art school, right? But it's like once you get out of college or get out of your art classes and stuff like that, it's like you're not necessarily like talking to other artists like on a daily basis, like, you know, where they can be like, dude, how's your whatever project you're working on going, you know? I don't know.
You know what I've found along those lines though is if you're not doing like an art check or something, I still think it's really important to share your progress publicly and make public statements about your goals, or at least what you're working on. Because I've noticed, you know, I teach at a university, and there are people that I don't talk to that often that are in my department or whatever, that they'll come up to me and they'll say, "So, what are you working on?" Because I've been so public with that I'm always working on projects in the evenings. They'll ask me like about my projects, and it's just that little thing in the back of my mind that I'm like, oh man, like people are aware that I'm doing this, and so I really need to make sure that I'm doing, you know, something on it all the time so that I can show progress. That's happened to me half a dozen times this semester, where somebody's just come up and said, so how's your book going or whatever, and it's like somebody that I don't speak to often, like
Yeah.
you know, I wouldn't say we're not friends, but like we don't like hang out or anything. And so I think that's something, because when I talk to students, I'm like, one of the key components of doing getting better at stuff is a project. And one of the major things about a project is you have to show public progress, and you have to like stick a stake in the ground and say, this is what I'm going to try to do. Because there's something about doing that and knowing that other people are going to hold you accountable. Because I mean, like, there's a huge difference in my classes when I say, hey, you know, do this project, and then they turn it into me, and they don't really care what I think, right? But if I'm like, hey, do this project, and when you do it, I'm going to pull it up, each one of your projects in front of the class and show everybody what you did and tell you what you could improve on. They work way harder when their peers are, when it's in the back of their mind that their peers are going to be aware of the work that they're producing. And I've seen that in myself when I'm like, you know, just working on stuff and I don't plan on showing anybody, whatever. I just dork around and kind of mess around, and I might not ever finish it, or I might finish it, or I might just abandon it or whatever. But when it's like part of something that is going to be publicly shown, like my sticker stint, 100 days of animation, 100 days of making comics, those all have a component of public accountability, where it's like, I have stated that I'm going to do this thing, and I know that there are people that are commenting and watching these videos. And so you have that extra added thing. Like sometimes during the 100 days animation for me, when I was like beat, like by the time I got into like the 70s and 80s, I was fried.
Oh yeah.
And then it was like, I remember thinking, oh crap, I've got to make a video. And so the fact that I had to make a video meant I've got to do something today. And so I would I'd start doing the half an hour, and with Resistance, for me, starting is the most difficult part. Yeah. Once I get started, I'm in the groove, and I might go for 3 or 4 hours before I realize, oh wow, that was, you know, I got a ton done or whatever. But it's like sitting down and doing it. And a huge incentive for me to sit down and do something is that I have to report back on something that I publicly stated.
Yeah, I love that's a really good way of putting it. Scott, you had mentioned that too, just like the idea of the importance of like, you know, like public accountability for, you know, getting your projects out. So whether that's, you know, like posting to Instagram or something like that. Because I found myself, for a little bit when I started this comic I'm working on right now, I was kind of working in a vacuum at first, and I think for maybe the first 40 or so pages, I wasn't really getting feedback from anyone, and I wasn't really showing anyone except like close friends, you know, locally, like what I was working on. And I did start doing that habit of just like deciding to kind of post just a progress shot every day. And that in itself, just like being like, okay, I need to post my progress that I did on Instagram, you know, that's helped me. I don't know if it's helped my Instagram account that much, but it's helped me keep my art, you know, moving and moving forward, you know.
Yeah.
Did you have you had kind of a similar experience with that, like with you know, like Young and the Dead and like bigger you know, projects, like when you're working on like a big like poster or something like that? I mean, have you have you had that?
Yeah. So first I wanted to say, because Mike left a comment in the chat that my mic was low. So yeah, I'm on my cell phone. I moved it closer, so hopefully it's a little louder now. But yeah, that's the only way I can connect to the internet right now is through my phone. So it's probably not going to be, my mic's probably not going to be at the same levels as Josh and Corey. But let me know if it sounds better. So anyway, so yeah, I wanted to touch on something that kind of based on what you said, because I get comments on my YouTube channel from people that are kind of whatever starting off or whatever, and it's frustrating in the beginning when like no one's watching, but it was kind of like what you were talking about, how in the beginning, I mean, you were working kind of, you know, in basically in solitude on your book, but even if a couple people are watching in the beginning, first of all, what I always tell people is it's good to, you know, when you start a YouTube channel or whatever, even if you don't, in the beginning, you're not going to have that many followers, but that's good because that gives you a chance to get more comfortable, make mistakes and things. But usually you'll have a few followers, and that even if you're not, whatever your goal is on YouTube, if you're trying to, you know, promote your work or whatever, that might take a little while. But the one thing that usually doesn't take too long is just to get some people, maybe one or two people, maybe more, but that can kind of, like you said, can kind of hold you accountable. So even when you first started on YouTube, Josh, I mean, it took you a little while to start building a following, but even in the beginning, even if it's close friends or whatever, if you put it out there, that's gonna help you. So that's one. I mean, if you're thinking about starting a YouTube channel and you're looking at through the prism of, well, it's gonna take me so long to kind of build an audience, but try not to think of it that way. Try to think of it that, you know, if I do this, it's going to help me get my work done. And that's probably more important than trying to build a bigger audience. So I don't know if that actually answers your question so much, but it kind of, I think that kind of went along with what you were talking about. So I wanted to kind of bring that up.
For sure. I mean, like I've found that to be true. And I'm definitely, I think out of the three of us, probably the best case in point of that, like where I do not have, I think I have the weakest following on YouTube of all of us, but at the same time, like, you know, with my like tiny amount of subscribers, it's like I still do have, you know, guys, and a lot of them are from the hundreds and stuff like that. But I do have that as like an extra layer of accountability, and that's one of the things that really appealed to me about YouTube, you know, and kind of has kept me on it, even though I haven't seen like this exponential growth or anything in my channel. I really enjoy the community on YouTube and the fact that there's a really engaged art community. Like half the guys in the chat right now are like, a lot of these people like really help me keep going, like keep doing my stuff and you know, kind of avoid that feeling of being that tree in the forest, you know? So it's, I don't know. I think, you know, and through that, like, and through that YouTube community, it's like I've had a lot of cool stuff like this Artcasters and then like the art check thing. All of that's grown out of like a community that just kind of exists on YouTube and really wants to support other creators like in their endeavors and stuff. It's been really cool, you know. I don't know what like, has it been kind of like that for you, Corey, like with YouTube?
Yeah, I find YouTube to be fascinating. I've been on YouTube for a really long time, but I've only recently started using it for art. You know, and I had been making tutorials and stuff for that before, but once I actually started engaging with it as a platform for like vlogging, it's been fascinating. And I mean, during my 100 Days of Animation, which I kind of did as a result of like I had just finished my master's degree and I needed to do something to like not go insane because I had been so busy for like 14 months that I was like, I need to do something. It was fascinating to me. I just did that kind of as a way. I just saw Kevin do the 100 Days of Comics, and I was like, I think I could do something like that. But the result of that was I met all these really cool people. There's all these relationships that I've developed since then. And then on top of that, even when I had like nobody watching my videos, the idea that somebody might watch the videos at some point was actually enough to get what Scott was talking about, where, you know, I might have viewers.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it is kind of a fascinating thing to, I mean, YouTube in general. And actually, there's some new stuff that's happening. I don't know if you guys have seen, this is really recent within the last 48 hours, but Instagram has released what some people are calling the first real contender for YouTube. They've got long form stories now on what they're calling Instagram TV. And I'm kind of trying to toy with the idea of whether or not I'm going to jump into that, because I like the idea of getting onto platforms that have a potential to make it like early, so you can build an audience really, really fast. But then at the same time, I'm trying not to split my time too much, because I'm a little less excited about becoming a YouTuber. You know, like that's not, like on Scott's channel recently, he was doing a video talking about, I can't remember exactly what the video was, but the discussion became like, are you an artist or are you a YouTuber doing art? You know, and it was like, there are some YouTubers out there that you never see what they end up doing. You just see them do like, I'm going to draw with my eyes closed, or no, I'm going to draw with the marker. Let's see if I can paint this thing with a broken stick. And it's like, okay, well, that's really gimmicky, and I'm glad that, you know, you have an audience, but like, do you want to make some art? You know, and so I have that hesitation with new stuff, as I don't want, I'm not in it to try to like, I am in it to build an audience. But mostly I'm in it because I found it to be an exceptionally useful tool to keep me on track. And I mean, potential readers, I think what I'm doing on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram is I'm trying to give as much as I possibly can, which is why I do tutorials and stuff like that, so that the one time when I'm like, hey, if you guys have gotten anything out of my tutorials or enjoyed my videos at all, like, you know, I'm launching a Kickstarter, or, you know, please share this thing, because I never really ask anybody to do anything. And that's kind of, I can't remember what your initial question is, but that's kind of my initial goal on all social media. Is I just want a place to hang out with other artists and talk about cool things. And then at the same time, it helps me find really cool indie projects that I love, because that's like one of my biggest things that I really like to do is support indie artists. But then on top of that, I do plan on at some point in time kind of sticking my hand out, as uncomfortable as that feels, and saying like, hey, you know, if you've gotten anything from this, like, you know, I'm going to do a Kickstarter or whatever, you know, so if you can't afford it, share it or whatever, that type of thing. And I'm hoping that there's some kind of payoff with all of this along those lines.
Yeah. Like the 90% give, 10% ask thing.
Right.
Or exactly. I think Gary Vee calls it jab, 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 right hook or something like that. I think that's the same principle, but yeah, you know, I mean, that's kind of what I try to do. So.
Yeah. And I think the key to that is, I mean, especially with your channel, Scott, I mean, your channel is fascinating. I mean, you're adding a lot of value to YouTube. I mean, I scour what you and Gaz and other people are saying about conventions, because I've only been to a couple conventions, but I'm planning on tabling at some point in time, maybe not this year, but next year for sure. And so there's this, like the vlogs and the tips and the tricks and just like recounting your experiences and stuff like that. That's huge. And anytime you are kind of, you know, banking that goodwill into the community checking account, you know, at some point in time you can make a withdrawal and say, you know, hey, you know, I'm gonna do this thing or whatever. I don't know, you know what I mean? I like the 90-10 because if you look at community involvement as a way to kind of like take, that just feels weird and is always going to come across as strange. And so I think I kind of err on the opposite side where I'm constantly giving, and almost never ask, but I'm gearing up to ask. At the end of this book, I'm gonna do something. So I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, I've seen even smaller creators who do that, and they found success with it. So I mean, as long as you're giving, you know, people are willing to kind of pay it forward, or you know, kind of, I guess pay it forward is a different principle, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
support you when, you know, when you do kind of need it, or you know, want to let people know about something.
Right. And I think the trick is that there can't be a trick. You've actually really got to be like a human being who likes to help people and enjoys real conversations, because it's that backyard barbecue principle, right? Anything that feels normal at a backyard barbecue is cool to do online, but if somebody were to drive up to a barbecue, everybody's having a good time talking to each other about stuff and doing all these things, and then somebody drives up in a blacked out SUV and steps out with a big bullhorn and says, "My name is so-and-so, and I'm here to announce that I'm doing whatever. Please support this thing." And then they get in their car and they drive away, having never like actually engaged or had a relationship with anybody there. Everybody's going to look at that dude and go, well, that guy's a douchebag, you know, and just like, and then just carry on with the actual friends and people that they have. So,
yeah, I mean, I think the point being, you know, it's like, it's better to be the person like having a direct phone call with a friend than, you know, the person like cold calling a phone. And how often do you answer just like a cold call from like a marketer, you know? And then how do you feel when you pick it up and you find out it's a telemarketer, you know? And it's like, because the reason people are uncomfortable with that isn't just that it's like a phone call from a stranger, which is weird enough, but it's also the fact that you know what their motive is. They just want your money and they're trying to sell something and they're taking up your time.
Yeah,
so it's like,
exactly.
You know, it's a really good, that is a really good piece of advice there.
I can't take credit for it. The guy who's in charge of the Utah legislature, I was at a luncheon with him, and that's how he described how he tries to teach senators to talk on Twitter and stuff. And he gave some examples of some people who are known, like you'd recognize their names, and he's like, yeah, like so and so, when he shows up on Twitter, he sounds exactly like this, and that's what he said. And he described the blacked out SUV with the bullhorn, and I was like, yep, he does sound like that. So, anyway. Yeah, so we're talking about motivation and whatnot. The incentive side of that is I find really interesting too, and I feel kind of, I'm curious on your guys' thoughts on this. We've talked about it a bit in the 48-hour art check, but I kind of feel like I'm experimenting on myself, like I'm this weird little rat in a maze or whatever. There's a little thing, because I will do this constantly. Like, I hate grading. Grading is the worst part of my job. The rest of my job is awesome, but I literally will have to go in and say, okay, I'm going to grade 5 more of these things, and then I get to you know, do X or whatever. And it is down to actual things that you would do with lab mice, where I'm like, I have a bag of M&Ms, and I'm like, all right, I can have a handful of M&Ms after I grade this thing or whatever. And with this, I've also found, like, I'll be working on these giant pages with way more ink than I'm used to putting down, and it's actually getting really tiring the amount of stuff that I'm doing. And I like video games a lot, but I can bury, 6 to 8 hours of an evening into video games, and then at the end of it, you feel empty and hollow, and I haven't accomplished anything. But if I've like gotten a bunch of stuff done, and then I play video games for a while, no matter how long it is, I don't feel bad about that. And so what I do now is I'm like, all right, I'm gonna finish like this section of this page, or I'm gonna finish this tree, or I'm gonna finish this figure. And when I get to that point, then I'm gonna take a break. And I'm gonna play some Rocket League, or I'm gonna play some Just Cause, or something like that. So I have these little mini incentives that like help me get through these long stints. And it also serves as a way to like save my back. I've seen so many artists on Twitter talk about like having slipped discs and having to go to the chiropractor all the time and having like surgery and whatever. And I have like knots in my back because you're like, your arm is always out, or you're leaning on something, and it's not like a normal thing. But these little incentive things where I can come in and say, okay, I'm going to work on this thing, and I'll set kind of a goal, kind of like Scott, what you were saying, if you're running or hiking or whatever, you're like, I can make it to that telephone pole, or whatever. And so when I get to that, then I actually change position. So I'll get up, I'll kind of stretch, I'll kind of do that, and then I'll play video games for a few minutes, or I'll go for a run, or I'll go make myself a sandwich. But what I'm actually doing is I'm making sure that my back isn't in this hunched C position for like 9 hours without ever moving. And so there's like a number of things that I've noticed because I've just started doing that in the last couple of weeks. It's been super helpful. Do you guys do stuff like that, or am I just weird?
Yeah, I do. So
I'm weird.
No, part of it. I don't know how to say this without sounding not condescending, but sounding like I don't know. But part of it to me is like the finished art is its own reward type of thing. But
sure. Yeah.
But doing things like you're talking about, there are certain things that I don't really like to do. Like I'm making these. I've done them before, and I'm working on a new one too. But these digital avatar sets that I'm building, and it's so time consuming, and there's so many different elements that I have to, I've got the AI files that I'm creating, but I'm also creating Photoshop files. And I've tried to figure out if there's a way that I can do it where I can create an action to do it in Photoshop, but I can't really figure it out. But I have to take all these assets from Illustrator, bring them into Photoshop, put them in different layers, name them, all this different stuff. And it just takes forever. And so when I'm doing that, I do that thing where it's just like, okay, I'm gonna do all the noses right now. I'm gonna do all the noses. So I go and I do all the noses. I'm like, okay, I got those done. Now I can do all the ears or whatever, or do the eyes, and then and then it just gets to the point where it's like super late. I really need to stop and eat something,
right,
or drink some water or something like that. But it's that kind of thing. The things that I don't like doing, the tedious part of it. Yeah, I do kind of set those little goals.
Yeah, I do that for the reasons that, like, for a couple reasons. Because one is that it keeps you going. And even on parts that I enjoy, I find that if I make little like stopping points, like where I'll be like, okay, I have to finish like the figure in the foreground, and then I can like have a glass of water or something, get up and take a minute, I find that that's super useful because the time goes by a lot quicker. And I just catch myself kind of subconsciously doing it. It's something I've done for a really long time. But it's like I'll just, I'll be like, okay, I can't like leave this desk until I've inked this building. You know what I mean? But It's like once that building's done, then I can get up and stretch and like, grab a snack or whatever. And it's like I might even be enjoying drawing the building, but it's like, if I don't have that little milestone, it'll go one of two ways, which is I usually will catch myself either working too much on something and then like completely being burnt out and like you were saying, you know, having like back pain and stuff like that the next day. Or I'll catch myself like, you know, on the other end, just like completely like, you know, just being like, screw this, and like getting up and not working on it at all. So it's like, it usually goes one of two ways if I don't like set those little incentives. But if I set them, I find that like I get a lot done. And then you also stay sane in the process, you know, because especially to me, like there's different modes with different, I'm kind of curious if you guys have this, but for me, like doing design is much more of a zoning out, playful thing. And so I catch myself when I'm designing and I'm working on a project like, or video editing, like hours will just slip and I have no idea they passed. Like, so I could kill like, you know, 4 hours editing a video and it doesn't feel like 4 hours. I just feel it physically, you know, 4 hours later. So with the like design projects, I'm really curious if you guys have that. Like, whereas with drawing, I think because there's a lot more thinking going on when I'm doing it, it's like I feel the time a little more. I don't know. Do you guys have that, like different projects where it's like, for me, like I have to be careful not to zone out and like skip eating, that kind of thing on some things, like particularly like dipping into this After Effects thing. I've just found that like time just zooms by when you're messing around with it, and then I'll be like blink and it's like 2 a.m, you know, and I'm like, oh, I gotta break. So, I don't know. Do you have that?
Yeah, part of that is the modality of your brain. It's an interesting study, but you can look at what it is that you are, what it is that you're doing, and you're doing different parts of your brain, and different modes of thinking actually come with different abilities. And so when you are in an analytical mode, you'll be very aware of time. But when you're in a more creative or nonlinear mode, you will lose track of time. And that's why people say like time flies when you're having fun or whatever. But it's actually literally true that you don't have the ability of like verbal communication or of processing the concept of time when you're in, you know, what traditionally has been called like a right-brained style of thinking. And so you're actually slipping into something that neurologists call the default mode network. And the default mode network is really interesting because that's where a lot of really good things happen. Like, but a good example of that is if you're really bored, it's such an uncomfortable state of mind for your brain that your brain will begin inventing problems to solve, or it will recount recent challenges that you've had. And so if you introduce a concept to your brain and then go do something else, your brain will start to work on that problem for you in this mental downtime, this restful wakefulness. And so there are definitely different things that you can do to get used to switching different modalities of thinking. And a lot of people do this naturally without understanding anything about the brain. But like what you just pointed out is like, there are certain things where I have to think. That's probably a more analytical process. It's more of a linear, logical problem solving. And so you'll be very aware of the time. But there are other things like that become very almost autonomic. Like I've gotten really good at inking this particular technique. And so I don't have to think about it anymore. That's like operant conditioning, right? Where the muscle memory of my hands has created a situation where my logical brain doesn't have to engage. My mind can wander at that point in time, and you can lose track of time because you're actually in a modality of thinking that doesn't require analytical process.
That's so funny, because thinking about it, even in the drawing process, like, and I think we've talked about this on Artcasters, but it's like generally, you know, the inking stage of the comic is like, I think we've all kind of described it as like, oh, okay, now the fun part, you know, like, right. Because you just kind of zone out and knock it out, you know, and it's like, but it is funny because it's like when you get back to like the the drawing and like the focus and, you know, having to get that underlying structure and communicate what you're trying to do and stuff. That's interesting because time seems to go a lot slower during those times. You know, that is fascinating.
And a lot of that is because when you are trying to do layout, or what I'm doing right now, because I can't talk and do it at the same time, where I'm trying to figure out anatomy. Anatomy to me is not something that I've spent enough time with to where it comes automatically. And so I'm doing a lot of math in my head, ratios and comparisons of lengths and angles. And so my ability to do that, I'm very aware of the time, and it's not a thing that just slips by, and I can't talk and do it at the same time. But yeah, it is an interesting thing.
That's fascinating. Do you have that, Scott? Like we're like working in, like for instance, when you're working on like a poster, one of your posters that, because you have like some really immensely strong design skills as well as strong drawing skills, and you use both quite frequently. Do you find like one side of the process feels like it takes less time or is more effortless?
Yeah, definitely. And I sometimes I'm wondering if it's like a negative thing for me, because there's certain techniques that I do that I become so comfortable with that it's like almost second nature. And sometimes I'll continue to use those techniques when maybe it might help for me to branch out and try something new. But it's almost like, well, this is what I can do fast. This is how I can earn a living by doing the things the way I've always been doing them. Whereas if I kind of broke from that and experimented a little more, then maybe I could take my artwork to another level. But it's almost like, well, do I stop doing what works for me, and that again that I can put food on the table and everything, and take time that I'm not that it's going to take a lot longer to learn some new things that, like I said, would really push my art a little more. So I constantly battle with that in my head. But yeah, I mean, there's certain techniques like at my day job, there's certain ways that I illustrate certain things that are like super quick. And I kind of continue to do that. There's like when I do the posters, but the one thing that I really want to do is, over the last convention, I mean, I'm just, walk around and look at people's stuff and everything. And I think I need to kind of my poster design. I think I can stand to do a little more with it and kind of do a hybrid of the stuff that works for me, but put a little more time into it, add some newer techniques, and just really spend a little more time and more of the thought process. Because sometimes I kind of got in this mode where, especially with the comic book, because I had such a problem with finishing things, that I got in the mode where it was like, okay, I'm going to do this to the best of my ability at the time and not worry about having to redo it and do all this other stuff. And I got that to kind of work for me, and I actually was able to produce things. But now that I've been able to produce things, maybe I need to step back and kind of work a little harder on certain things and try to, especially with my poster design. I don't know, because like with the comic, I don't want to do that so much because I've already established a style that's kind of based on the way I do things. So I don't want to do that. Maybe after I wrap up Young and the Dead, I might do something different with whatever the next project I work on as far as comics go. But as far as the prints, yeah, there's certain things like I want to work a lot more with like negative white space and just different things that it's hard to explain here, but in my head, I see different things that I could really improve on and just have some really like showstopper pieces that can, I think, because a lot of the people that are doing really well at Comic Cons, I mean, I think I've got the branding thing down, but I think some of my prints could be a little better, to be perfectly honest. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and it actually kind of dovetails into another kind of incentive, which is like just when you were talking about that, it brought to mind when I used to do a lot of t-shirt work. One of the things I would do is like challenge myself with just weird, stupid challenges that no one looking at my art is going to think I was thinking. So like a perfect example, I did this shirt called Attack of Literacy, and it's like one of my best sellers. And I started that design with the intention to do a design on a yellow shirt that people would want to wear, because yellow is like the least popular shirt color that they
That is
had.
true. I just want to interject real quick, just because I bought the only yellow shirt I own is I think it's a threadless shirt, but it's Curious George, and it's from The Dark Knight, where he's got the Joker makeup, the Heath
I love that
Joker
one.
makeup, where it says "Why so curious?" But that shirt would not work on any other color than yellow, because the Curious George books all have that yellow.
Yeah.
So yeah, but sorry, I didn't mean to. But I knew that was your bestseller, and I know the whole thing with the yellow shirts, but I never realized that. Yeah, that's not a yellow shirt. So sorry about that. I just wanted to.
No, it's totally true. I mean, like I don't like wearing yellow shirts that often, but like that was just one of those things where I was in the game long enough to where I was like, well, I could do another shirt on this color that everybody's going to pick because it's a nice base color, and you can use it for a shadow tone or something like that, you know. The default for most artists when they first start doing t-shirts is like a gray, you know, where it's like, okay, like I can do this on like a heather gray, and then you know that reduces it by one color, so I can use the gray as like a shadow tone or something like that. And you know, and so on. But like as I got more and more into it, just to keep myself engaged, I'd have a little extra challenge like that, where I'd be like, okay, I have a concept, but to make this harder for myself, I'm going to try to make this work on yellow and make it appealing with yellow, because that's just hard to pull off, to make a yellow shirt people want to wear, you know? And like that was just one example, but it's like I do that all the time with my comic too, where I'll take on challenges like what I'm doing now, where it's like, what if I switched styles like every other chapter, you know? Or like on a page by page basis, where it's like I've never drawn a building from this perspective, like what's going to happen if I do that. And for me, like that's another thing that incentivizes and keeps me interested, because if I'm not constantly challenging myself or trying something different, then I catch myself getting bored and burnt out easier on especially long form projects, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and again, look at the T-shirt. I mean, that's probably I'm pretty sure that's your most well-known T-shirt. I mean, that's the one. Isn't that the one that's been seen on like TV and all the other stuff? And
yeah, it's like one of three.
Okay.
Because there's like, you know, 2 or 3 shirts, you know, that I got, you know, got pretty viral and stuff like that. And that's one of the ones that whenever it's reprinted, it sells pretty well without me having to do a lot of work, you know. And it's like, you know, like I'm not attributing that yellow thing to why it worked, but it's like, I guess what I'm getting at is just like, at the time I made that was like my primary living was doing t-shirts. And the thing that happens with any job is you catch yourself just kind of phoning it in. If you do a job, like if you do something long enough, it's like, yeah, you know, whatever, no matter how creative it is, you know, there's that tendency to sometimes kind of forget to keep yourself engaged, you know? And so like just coming up with little art challenges like that on every project, I found really works. I have to do that at work all the time too, because what we do is very repetitive. So I have to like find what is the thing about this one thing that I have to knock out that I'm gonna try, or different thing that I'm gonna try with this, just to like try to keep myself from just phoning it in, because people can read that. You know, we've talked about that on here, but like, you know, about authenticity and stuff. And I think like there's one thing I can definitely say, like Scott, on your prints, like you're definitely picking subject matter and stuff that you're into. So it's like I don't think I've ever seen like a print on your site where I was like, oh, Scott wasn't feeling that, you know? I don't know if that makes sense.
Right.
But do you guys catch yourself doing that? Like just coming up with little, not just goals for like breaks, but also just like little goals within an art piece to keep yourself engaged or challenged?
Yeah. And I struggle with something that Scott just mentioned too. A lot of times I'll do that with technique and style and subject matter. But I mean, I'm working on a 40-page book and I'm 37 pages into it. And so at this point in time, if I'm like, I'm going to try a brand new way of doing this bonsai tree, like it'll break that. And so that is kind of an interesting thing. But what I've done is I found reasons in the story to change things like that. A lot of what I try to do is I'm like, okay, I'm trying to convey this particular emotion or foreshadow this particular story beat or whatever. I'll change up where I'm getting my inspiration. So for one of these pages, I was like, I'm gonna see like what would I do if I was Frank Miller doing 300. But for a different one, I'd be like, okay, what would I do if I was the cinematographer of Star Wars, or whatever. And so I'll switch up kind of the material, and it actually is interesting because it'll change up significantly the results of that page, but not in a way that changes the style or the look of anything on the surface, I guess. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
No, it doesn't. And I think it shows on that book. Like, it's like there's a lot of compositional changes and then different textures that you're using and brush techniques.
mm-hmm.
So there's a variety of different things that just looking at it, I would almost assume you had done that, to keep yourself engaged.
Yeah. And hopefully it's not like distracting. Hopefully it works, because that is the danger of doing that. But I mean, otherwise, because I was saying this the other day, the next book I do, it is going to take place so far away from nature that I don't have to even draw a leaf. I am so sick of leaves and bark and cliffs and water. Anyway, because I've kind of exhausted like how to continue to do that in an interesting way. But I've got to finish this story. And so, yeah, it is kind of an interesting challenge to try to like, how do you continue to stay engaged in a project that's a long form project that's taking you a while. I think that's. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
So I was just gonna say, I before, when I said that I was worried about, if I started doing something different, that it would take a lot more time or whatever. But sometimes I'm wondering if sometimes you can do something that's even in some ways might even be a shortcut, or more time efficient, but you have end up having a better result. Like, and I don't know if this is, I can't really speak to this exactly because I'm not the person, but so, and I always forget I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, but is it Mike Mignola? How do you pronounce his last name?
I've always heard of Mignola.
Mignola. Okay, so Mike Mignola. So way back in the days when he first started, like when he first broke into comics, I was collecting Alpha Flight, and I think that might have been one of his first books. That, or like the first Rocket Raccoon miniseries. And so back then, I mean, I loved his artwork because I think John Byrne had left Alpha Flight, and I like John Byrne stuff. But when Mike Mignola came on, I was like, oh man, this is so awesome. It's just so fresh and different. And keep in mind, this is very different than the style he's famous for now. So when he eventually started transitioning to the style that he's so well known for, that, I mean, obviously when you look at his stuff, you know who it is. But I was kind of taken aback because it was kind of like, it seemed like he was taking shortcuts, because it was a little less detailed. He works a lot with the blacks and sort of the blockiness and everything. So it took me a while to get used to his newer style. But I would be willing to bet that his newer style is more time. It takes him probably took him less time than the way he was doing things before, or at least eventually. Maybe in the beginning it took him a while to kind of figure all that out. But And again, this is my own interpretation. I don't know if this is true or not, but look what happened. I mean, if it was kind of a time-saving thing, I mean, he just developed this style that is just, he's like world renowned for creating this kind of style that sparked so many imitators, and I mean, it's just really kind of revolutionary, the style that he kind of fell into. But I would hazard to guess that it was probably a way to get work done quicker.
Yeah, that's interesting to weigh out, like, and I think with most artists, like most art, you gotta, it's interesting to weigh whether the style develops for efficiency, or whether it develops, I think it's got to be a mix, because you're always looking for shortcuts, and I'm always trying to think of ways that'll make a process a little quicker, even with the like kind of crazy labor intensive stuff I think we all do. I think we're always looking for ways to kind of reduce that time. You know, it's kind of that never ending quest of the artist, because we have a lot of stuff we want to make, and it's time consuming. And so, hey, if I can come up with a trick that'll save me some time, cool. It's just, I still haven't found a good trick yet. Like, I haven't found a really good style that fits what I want to do now that's really quick. Although what I'm working on now, like this part of the style is fairly quick, Yeah. So I don't know. But yeah, that is interesting, because it's like, how much of that's expediency? I mean, even most brush techniques, are kind of developed out of that. Otherwise people would just, be using like dots to render everything perfectly, but it's like, feathering, like that's a shortcut on a brush,
Yeah.
And it's got a really cool, distinct, beautiful look to it, but it's a shortcut, It takes a lot less time to make a feathering line than to render a whole bunch of shadow, That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you guys do? Because Scott had mentioned that this was something that he saw me say on. I'll just tell a quick story. I finished, and this is a little bit embarrassing, but I did there's a game called Just Cause 3 that is one of the most entertaining video games I've ever played. It's like if like 13-year-old me and all of my friends got together and just thought of the craziest things that you could put in a video game. That's what it is. It's like a it's like a third-person shooter, but he's got like a grappling hook and a wingsuit and all this stuff. And it's an insanely engaging game. And I finished it like 3 or 4 days ago, where I just beat everything in the game. And one of my former students who he was really into gaming and stuff, I was like, okay, good, I finished it. Because it was kind of causing a lot of distractions, and I was using it as a way to reward myself, but sometimes it would go too long. Like, whereas Rocket League, I can do something really fast, play 1 or 2 games, and I'd be back on my project within 7 to 10 minutes or something. With Just Cause, that wasn't the case. And they had this big announcement where it's a big video game conference for E3, and they announced Just Cause 4. And I immediately thought, if I buy that game, I will never finish this book. So I flipped that and I said, okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to finish this book and either get a publisher or an agent or a Kickstarter or some sort of major milestone before I buy that game. And so instead of it becoming a distraction, it became something to kind of shoot for as kind of a reward. So we talked about like little micro incentives to like keep going on a day-to-day basis, but do either of you guys do something like that? Because I've heard of people like, celebrating rejection letters from publishers or whatever. And it's like, once I get 10 rejection letters, then I'm going to go out and grab a burger. And this one guy was talking about this, and he said on the 100th rejection letter. I was going to go on a cruise, and then I got my book published on the 93rd publisher that I went after, and he said, and then I went on a cruise anyway. But he had like little milestones, and so I'm curious: do either of you guys do larger incentives based on bigger stretch goals rather than?
I just want to say I love that idea because it's perfect, because no matter what, you win.
Right.
You know, the more rejection letters you get, you're winning because you're collecting rejection letters and you're incentivizing. You're almost like, oh, I hope I get one more rejection.
Right. If I get one more rejection letter, I get to do
the
whatever.
acceptance letter, then you win too. So it's like, right. Oh, that's brilliant. And I think
Oh no.
You cut out for a sec.
Where did I cut out?
You're back now. It's
right after the rejection letter bit.
Oh, I was just saying, if you get that rejection letter, then you really wins. I mean, if you get the acceptance letter, then you win. So right. Either way, but I was just gonna say, I was gonna pass it over to Josh because I'm trying to think if I've ever done that, and nothing's come to me yet. But
I know currently I have a little thing, and it's not a reward, but it's like it is a delayed gratification type thing, like what you're talking about, where I'm not allowing, and some of my friends who are cartoonists are like, this doesn't make any sense, you know, but it works for me because I really like, I like conventioning. I like going to conventions. I don't like going to big conventions like San Diego Comic-Con, but like local indies and stuff, I love it. Because it's like I discover so much work. It's really fun. It's nice to like meet people in the community. You don't feel like alone in doing comics. You're surrounded by people who love what you love. And so I've made a deal where I've told myself that I can't go to conventions until I'm done with this book. And for me, it's more of a personal reality check of like, what am I doing at a convention without a book? Like, I need this to be a book, and I need to be at that convention making what I want to have happen. You know what I mean? So for me, that's one of them. Some people think that's nuts, but I think it's great because it's like it works for me. Because anytime I have a friend who's like, dude, I'm going to be at this convention, you should stop by. I'm like, I can't. And then every time I have to say that, I'm like, I got to finish this book, you know? So
yeah. So I was going to say, because didn't you meet Kevin at a convention?
Yeah. I mean, I met Kevin at like Portland Zine Symposium back in the day, and I love conventioning, but I don't want to booth without the thing I want to sell. Like, if I were to booth right now, it'd be stuff I made years ago that I'm not trying to promote. I'm not really, you know, I'm in a similar position to you guys where I'm not really in a position where I like absolutely have to, it's not like do or die with that kind of stuff. It's like I'm selling stuff I want to sell. And so, now, don't get me wrong, I want it to sell, and if I'm going to invest money in a booth or whatever, it's like I'm hoping to recoup it. But I just came to this realization of like, there's no point in me boothing at a convention until I have like this book done, because that's the thing I want to do a convention for. There's nothing else I really want to sell at a convention, you know? Not that I can't sell anything else. It's just, you know, I don't know if that makes sense. Does that answer?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on that, and the reason why I brought up Kevin was because I was just thinking, you know, if you're thinking, and this may be a little off topic, but I'll try to make it quick. But I think it's relevant, and you know, people that go to convention, I mean, obviously you want to go there and you want to try to turn a profit, and I don't know at that particular show if you did or not. Probably back then you probably did because it was a different time. But think, you know, if you went to that show, you met Kevin. And from that came Big Illustration Party Time, which was basically the first podcast I ever listened to. And then, you know, then there was Art and Story, and then Kevin did, the 100 Days of Making Comics, and just that butterfly effect, that everything that happened kind of came out from this chance meeting between you guys. So, I mean, that's such a, even if you like, I don't know, you know, what you pulled in, but even if you lost money, think of what was gained from that, from
Yeah.
going to the convention. You know, not just for YouTube, but just for pretty much everyone in the 100s. Everyone, I mean, me, I would never probably have a YouTube channel. If it didn't start with sort of big illustration party time and you know, then like I said, then art and story and all, and then, you know, watching Kevin and then learning about the 100 days and all that stuff. So it's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, that was, I mean, it's funny. I've had so many weird things like that happen, and I'm sure we all have, like, where it's like, you know, if you do the butterfly effect thing with like certain career things and like, you know, like even the job I have now, it's like, had I been like a company man and just stayed in house, I would never have gotten this art director position. And yet I kind of want to be a company man and stay in house now, you know? But it's like, I don't, it's weird. It's like, it's weird how like these little things that I felt were waste of time at the time, but were just pursued out of passion, kind of end up having these awesome ripple effects, you know? Which is why, like, when I take very seriously those weird 4 a.m. ideas sometimes because of that. Because that's how BIPT started with Kevin and I. It was like literally us meeting at a convention and talking and being like, dude, we work from home. We're both illustrators. And we were just like bonding over like having like somewhat loneliness because it's a really isolated field. And so we were just like, do you listen to a lot of podcasts? And we were talking about like all the different podcasts we listen to. And how great podcasts were. And then we were like, there's no podcast about illustration, so let's just do one. And like, so pursuing that kind of thing, it has never been a bad thing for me. And like, so that's why, like, even with the Artcasters, when you guys first invited me on, I was like, yeah, let's do it. Because it sounds fun and it sounds potentially like it might be, you know, worthwhile to do. And so much cool stuff has come out of doing this. And Corey, like that art check thing, like the second we talked about it, I was like, no. Like next day when we wake up, we should do this, you know, like, let's see when we wake up, is this like a crazy idea or does it stick a little bit? And I think for both of us, it kind of stuck. And so it's like, to me, I want to pursue those kind of things because of that, like, because of that weird butterfly effect that happens out of weird ideas like that, you know?
And I'm glad you pushed that, because my initial response to that was kind of like, yeah, that would be crazy. You know, kind of like that would be fun. And then I was going to move on. And it's been huge. I don't think it's a stretch for me to say that the art check is largely responsible for me finishing this book on time.
That's awesome.
So, and that's like huge. So yeah, it is really interesting. Somebody, was it Mike? Let me check the chat. Yeah, Mike Emirates was saying the butterfly effect. If there's ever a rip in the space-time continuum, we need to make sure that Josh and Kevin meet at that con. It's super interesting because if you think about it, like, just look at the effect that the effect that has happened on this community of people, and how much each one of us continue to affect the other. Because it's not like Josh and Kevin are continuing to be the only ones that are driving this community. It's a really interesting thing that, you know, somebody will get on there and they'll see something that Ox does, or see something that Chris does, or see something that Scott does, or whatever, and then it's this like continual build. You know, and I think the 48-hour art check is a really interesting example of that, because it kind of came out of a little bit out of the 100s, a little bit out of Sticker Stint, and then it's already morphed into the 168, where it's like a weekly version that other people are doing, and
with a way better theme song. I still love the 168.
It's a way better theme song, and I like that the words change every time. But yeah, and it's this cool thing and that's one of the things that I love about art and creativity and stuff like that, is that it's this constantly evolving, like, if you ever try to nail it down, you lose it. You know, I remember reading this book. This is probably the nerdiest book I've ever read. The Secret History of Star Wars, and it's a guy who goes through with like a historical perspective of how the first trilogy was created, and what George was doing at the time, and who he was collaborating with, and the claims that he made versus the evidence of whether those claims were true or not. And at the end of that book, he said it's really interesting that George Lucas, because of his daddy issues with the way that his dad treated him, and their distance relationship, was constantly trying to prove something to his deceased father, which did two things. One was it created one of the most incredible universes that's ever come out of fiction. But two, it caused him to never own up to the fact that creativity is a constantly changing thing. There was something about admitting the weakness of saying, yeah, I didn't have the story done at the beginning. Like I didn't know Luke and Leia were siblings, and Darth Vader wasn't even that important, and I didn't even come up with the mask. That was the guy who came up with the illustration because he was coming in from the vacuum of space, and so he had to breathe somehow. But then he became super iconic, and so he rewrote stuff, and then he didn't have contracts with Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill, and so he wasn't sure whether they were going to come back for a third movie, so he threw in this throwaway line that would give him an out. There is another, just as a way of saying, if they don't come back, I'll just rewrite it and figure something out. All of that built this incredible thing, and it's this like snowball of butterfly effect and this avalanche of creativity and everything. And it's fascinating to see how defensive he is about that process. But if you just apply that to like this community and the projects that we're working on, like my book initially was like 20 pages. And so it's increased like 30%, and it's gotten way better because of me running it by other people and collaboration, and like how that spins out and whatever. It's just super interesting how like no one's really ripping each other off. Like I don't feel like anybody that's doing 48-hour art check is ripping us off. And Kevin's never claimed that, like, oh yeah, all these people doing the 100 days of making comics are ripping me off. Everybody's just super excited that people are making stuff, because creativity is just contagious and so collaborative that it's such a fascinating thing. So that whole space-time continuum thing, it's interesting to think about what would have actually happened had Kevin and Josh not met.
Yeah, that's a trip. I'm glad we did. I think that's the weird thing is like, and keep in mind, I'm not. I think Kevin would have done it regardless, but I think that just thinking about that, I think like some of my best memories from when I lived in Portland are doing that podcast, and like Kevin and I being up till like 4 a.m. and coming up with some stupid bit that we really wanted to do. And we'd like edit for like 10 hours and decide like, hey, let's have like a country song that makes a stupid joke like in the middle of this thing. But we had a lot of fun with it. And I think that like, I've never been a big fan of collaboration. And yet here I am, I'm collaborating with, Scott on like Artcasters, and I'm collaborating with you, Corey, on like, this 48-hour art check. And it's like, I'm finding myself collaborating with a lot of people. And I think it's just the community you choose to collaborate with, because there are some people who are going to like, be like, hey, I got this opportunity. It's good exposure. Let's work on this thing together. You do 90% of the work and I'll sit back and write it or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's some of that goes around in the comic world. And yet you're right about the hundreds. Like there's something really neat about that community, because it's mostly composed of people who like, for one thing, one of the really unusual things is we kind of celebrate each other's successes. And that's a weird thing for a group of, people in a slightly competitive field. That's a pretty nice thing, I like that a lot about this group of people. And I think they're just, like I said, it's a feeling that you get when you hear something, you're like, it's kind of like the same feeling you get when you come up with a concept for like a shirt that you're like, that's going to be like, you just know in your gut that it's going to be a good selling thing, you know? And it's like, it's like, you can't explain it, but you're just, and it's like, you almost didn't even come up with the concept. You just kind of hit a brick wall until it just appeared. Those kind of moments happen with people and collaborative things where it's just like, yeah, that makes sense. That'll be fun. And that's a good idea. Somebody should do it. You know, I think that's where it starts with most of that stuff, even with writing. It's like, you know, I think most of our projects probably came from like, why hasn't anybody done this? You know, and if you're the type of person who's a creator, that's a perfect moment to be like, oh, I'll do it. You know, I think that's kind of the community we're in.
I think you just brought it back around to the topic when you said that we celebrate each other's successes, and it's that community thing is, you know, when you how you relate that to, you know, being held accountable, that community will hold you accountable and everything. So I mean, I don't know where we on time, but I think we kind of wrapped it around. But I mean, you're the one hosting, Josh. So I don't know. I mean,
I think we've been going for about 2 hours.
Yeah.
So. What a great conversation. All right, well, let's wrap it up. So I will really quickly hit save, and then I guess I'll just go. I'll start it off. You're on my channel. You know where to find me. Corey, where can we find your stuff?
Yeah, so you can check out my stuff at CoreyKerr.com. I tried to get a lower third, but it's not there. But CorYKerr.com. And check me out on Instagram. And I'm going to start doing stuff on Instagram TV, so IGTV, as well as YouTube and Twitter and whatnot. And so, yeah, but all of that's going to be kind of fed from CoreyKerr.com. So you can check that out. And you can see a lot of the pages that I finished for this book. I've got examples of those up on that on my website, and you can see me doing time-lapse drawings of those pages on Instagram and YouTube.
Yeah, and they're very cool, so go check them out. All right, Scott, so other than at a resort, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube. I'm at CircWorks on YouTube, circworks.com. MadScienceSupplyCompany.com is another way you can get there, but it kind of takes you to the same place. Yeah, I'm on all the social networks, more or less: Twitter, Facebook, Instagrams.
The Instagrams.
I gotta check out. I haven't heard of this YouTube competitor Instagram thing that they're doing, so I got to look into that. But yeah, so hoping to be more active on Instagram, you know, soon. But yeah, I'm just kind of here, you know. I don't know. YouTube's the big one, though. Find me on YouTube, and just to let everyone know, if you want to know where to find us, because sometimes crazy things happen. Like I try my best to bring all my, you know, internet set up, my computer and all this stuff when I'm, you know, on a business trip, and it doesn't work out. So, because I was supposed to be hosting this this week, but Josh was. So, but like we always say, we do this at a different time. They're on different channels. We usually switch around. Usually week to week, we bounce back and forth between our two channels. But if we run into an issue like we did today or whatever, if you want to know where we're going to be, then sign up for our newsletter, and we will send you the link, and all you have to do is click on that, and that will take you to whatever channel it is, at whatever time it is, whatever day it is. So that's kind of how this whole thing works. And that link for the newsletter is in the description of this video.
All right. So we will see you guys next week, and probably on Scott's channel. All right.
Yeah.
Bye.